Oh, okay, there we go. We're gonna record this going forward. Give me 1 second here.
Joanne?
Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
Oh, it's Sandra.
Sandra.
I'm here just to say hi. I mean, I'm going to be coming Tuesdays, but I just wanted to introduce myself to the class. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Thank you. I didn't realize you were in the cast of thousands of faces that I see. So yeah, go ahead, please, Sandra.
Thank you. Well, I just want to say hi to everyone. I will be seeing you Tuesdays. My name is Sandra. This is my 4th time being a TA for ADPY 301. So I know the content. I am familiar with the assignments and with the quizzes and everything that you will be doing. So please feel free to send me an email if you have any questions. You can also book an appointment. Like Anna said, you can book an appointment with any of us. Anna has worked in this course as well, so she knows very well what the assignments are about and what we look for when we are marking the assignments. A little bit about me, I'm also an international student. I am from Mexico, so I am missing the warm weather right now. I was very excited about the cold in my first winter here, but it was a good winter. This one is this minus 30. It's too long now. Like I can't anymore. But I'm happy.
It is bad.
I love my program. I'm also in the special education PhD program. I'm doing my thesis on reading fluency development. Back in Mexico, I worked at Canadian schools, English immersion schools that follow the Canadian curriculum, specifically the Alberta curriculum. And there I was a special education teacher. I also have experience with adaptations, modifications, particularly with children with learning disabilities and ADHD. So nice to meet you all, and I'm very happy to be once again with this course. It's going to be really, it's a beautiful course, beautiful content, and I hope everyone enjoys it. And that will be all. Thank you, Joanne.
Well, thank you, Sandra. I'm going to talk a little bit now about the interpreting services for this class. We have 3 interpreters. We have deaf and hard of hearing students that are involved in the course, and you have me. So I have my own interpreter too. So I thought if we could have each interpreter just introduce yourselves, your names, and we have the 2 interpreters in the same location, so they're just going to ask them to just pop in front of the camera so that the students know what faces they're seeing. Let's start with the classroom teachers first. Maybe, okay, just hang on. If Tracy will pin the interpreters and then maybe she can interpret for them. Hang on. Tracy's got to find the.
It's okay, Tracy. It's okay. Go ahead, Shelley.
Hello, this is Diane DeAndre, and my name is Shelley Nefshi, and we will be interpreting this course. And sometimes we'll be on 2 separate screens, and sometimes we'll be sharing a screen.
Thank you both. And then I'll introduce the designated interpreter that I work with, Tracy Hetman. And she can maybe give you a little bit of her own background. Okay. So mostly, can you watch Diane? Mostly I will have my camera off. I'm on a separate link with Dr. Weber because I will also be able to interpret for her things that are happening in the room. Like, for instance, if someone's mic is on and there's noise, she's not going to know that. It would be my duty to let her know. And of course, you'll hear my voice when Dr. Weber is signing And then the 2 classroom interpreters are concentrating on the service needs of students, and I'm concentrating on Dr. Weber. Thank you, Tracy. And so you might notice me, my gaze, Dr. Weber, changing from the camera on class in eClass and to my computer because I'm looking at Tracy. So I have a couple of screens on the go here, you on one screen and then Tracy on another. So I won't always be focused my eye gaze on the eClass camera. So I guess we have some issues with the textbook. I believe some students have purchased the textbook and there's some problems with the access code or when you're trying to get in to the right course section. I guess some of you couldn't find my name or this section and weren't sure what to do, and so ended up connecting to another course, another instructor's section. So I am in touch with the publisher. I started yesterday and asked, what's going up? How come they couldn't, students couldn't find my section? So apparently it was an error on their part where they closed my section. So you are to email them and let them know that you need to be switched to my section. And I've already put the email in the announcement section in eClass, so you should be able to find that there. But if you wouldn't mind CCing me on your communication with them, just so that I have a sense of who is having this problem and making sure it all gets resolved for everyone. And I guess there's some question about being able to get to use the textbook on a permanent basis and not just for the purposes of the class. I know it's not, it's digital, so it's not physical textbooks. I don't have information about that yet, but I will try to find out. I think the other issue we have to deal with is the Zoom link. Again, I couldn't get it working in eClass. And I think the techs are working on solving that problem. I think mine wasn't the only area that was having this problem. And they've had to prioritize their fires for the meantime. So you have the links, obviously, I sent it all to you, and you will be able to get into class through that Zoom link. There is an eClass app, but I think right now it's either they're not, it's not working properly or they're doing something with it so that it's not available right now, but it should be at some point where you can go through your phone and app to get into your eClass. Okay, so about this section. Most of this is going to be asynchronous. So you will be able to review the material on your own time according to what meets your schedule best. You don't have to come to the sections on Tuesdays and Thursdays if you don't want to. The main benefit, if you do show up, is that you will be able to have discussions with your peers. You will be able to ask questions and have live people answer you in the moment. Obviously, with a class of 120 people, I can't really interact with each of you, but it's still an opportunity for you to connect with one another and maybe set up your own communities of study or learning or discussion. I will have pre-recorded presentations, and we will be able to watch those during the section, like our class time, and then have discussions. So Tuesdays will be our lecture or presentation time. Once I show the recording, all of you can watch it during class time. When it's finished, we'll open it up to classroom discussion, questions, comments. And then usually each class on Tuesdays will have a second pre-recorded presentation or lecture. We'll show that. We can watch it together. And then again, at the end, we can invite discussion, questions, or comments. We won't have necessarily 2 presentations each week. That will vary. But I know I've got 2 planned for the first 2 weeks. So it could be once in a while, we just have 1 presentation per week, maybe 2. It kind of depends on the timing. So if you're, if you want to come, you can, but otherwise, really, this is a lot of independent learning. You'll be able to watch those presentations from eClass if you can't attend the section. So you have a choice of even watching it before class and then coming to class and then participating in the discussion. I will post the pre-recorded lectures before Tuesday's class, and I will show them during class time. And then of course they'll remain up and you can watch them after class if you want, or review them again if you want. Now, when I start the pre-recorded lecture, the chat will still be open and alive. And if you have comments or thoughts or questions, feel free to plop them in there. Anna will be here on Thursdays. So today Anna is responsible for watching the chat. So she'll answer what she can. And we'll use that format to kind of lead our discussion for after the recording. Any questions before I start the first presentation? Okay. I'm going to start that now and we'll get started.
Joanne?
Just 1 second.
Joanne?
Just 1 second. I'm not looking at the camera right now. Just 1 second here. Just wait, I'm waiting to see Tracy. Yeah, I just lost Tracy here, so give me 1 second.
A big hello and Happy New Year, everyone. I want to acknowledge all the challenges and frustrations we have had to negotiate due to the pandemic. I am expecting improvements in that regard. This course is EDPY 301, an introduction to inclusive education, adapting instruction for students with special needs. I am Joanne Weber, and I am the instructor for this section. Our ASL English interpreter is Tracy Hetman. The teaching assistant for this section is Sandra Romero Carrion. I want to begin with a brief discussion of Zoom meeting etiquette. The online learning experience is so different from the offline experience that I thought it worthwhile to cover some ground rules so we all understand the expectations going forward. Firstly, be sure to mute your microphone when not speaking. This eliminates unwanted background noise interference. You know what I mean, sounds of eating, children calling out, or dogs barfing. The kinds of things none of us wants to hear. I do have the ability to mute participants. If there is bothersome noise coming through, then I will mute it. During the synchronous part of the course, please turn on your video. As a deaf instructor, seeing students' faces, facial expressions, in particular, your responses to the material is important to me. In the event you are having technical difficulties, that would be a permissible reason to turn off your video. You can also turn off your video if someone is distracting, like, I don't know, housemates running around after each other in the background. Put your questions or comments in the chat window to avoid interrupting the speaker. Alternatively, you can use the raised hand icon to indicate you have a question you would like to ask in front of the group. Keep chat comments and questions on topic. It's not the time to share stories about your pet cat or rabbit or the goings on at pub night. Stick to course content. Pay attention to the contributions of all participants. Grab your coffee beforehand, not during class. Now I'll share a little bit more about my background. I am from Saskatchewan, where we are crazy about supporting our football team. Go Riders, go! Sadly, we did not make it to the Grey Cup this year. Oh well. I was born and raised in Saskatchewan. I was born profoundly deaf. I am still physically in Regina. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, I have yet to relocate to Edmonton, not only because of the risk of infection from the pandemic, but also because of the mask mandate. Communication for me is significantly disrupted when dealing with people wearing masks. I need to speech read and I need to see people's faces, even if they are using sign language. When someone is signing and wearing a mask, we can't see important facial grammar and facial expressions, so it's difficult to understand what's being said, whether it's English or ASL. So I have opted to stay put until the masking mandate is lifted. I am profoundly deaf, and I am culturally deaf. By culturally deaf, I mean that I identify as a deaf person who uses American Sign Language and observes the norms of the deaf culture. I have been an active member of the deaf community for many years. Formerly, I was a teacher of the deaf in a research program with deaf and hard of hearing students. I worked in that role for about 17 years, at which point I felt a change was needed, and I decided to pursue my doctoral studies at the University of Regina. When I lecture in ASL, Tracy will interpret into English. You may have already noticed that my presentation is formatted differently. Typically, presentations with interpreters have been inserted in a separate smaller window in a corner of the screen. For deaf participants, they are not easy to see, which raises the question of language equity. If the talking head was relegated to a small window, that would be okay, because their audience can hear them regardless of the size of their video window. Hearing their presentations doesn't require space, but sign language requires space. So the question becomes, how much space does or can be allocated? The bigger the space, the better the language equity. In sign language, we are expressing and attending or listening to multiple language features and input at the same time. Mouth movements combined with eyebrow movements need to be clearly seen in conjunction with the actual manual sign.
Oh, Tracy.
So we're just sorting out the sound tech issues. I think we have it resolved now, so we'll just move back to it.
Tracy, I think she can mute herself and still share the sound from her video.
Okay, I'm gonna get
Because the sound, I think it's coming from her end. Because I checked and everyone else was muted.
Tracy, we can't hear you when you're interpreting for Joanne. We cannot hear your sound. And Joanne is just saying, my mic is not active. I have deactivated my mic, so for sure it wasn't coming from my end, but it looks like it is resolved.
So you can't hear me?
Now we can hear you, Tracy, and the image of the video is of you and Professor Weber. So she's sharing a different screen now.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead with the rest of the recording.
In order to understand what's being said, the smaller space allocated to the signer, the harder it is to understand. Another difference you'll notice is the font size of the text portion of the slides. This is to accommodate audience members who may have vision difficulties. You will see my material presented in this format. Let's move on to discussing the course itself. This is an introductory course which will examine approaches for adapting classroom instruction and the environment for diverse learners. You'll begin to develop a problem-solving approach to your teaching in order to provide classroom learning opportunities for all learners. This is tough. I'll tell you here and now, this is not easy. I was a classroom teacher for more than 25 years, and believe me, this is the challenge. You'll be collaborating with peers to identify pedagogical issues pertaining to inclusive education. You're expected to present your oral and written communications and evaluations professionally. We are discouraging informal and familiar writing styles, even in email. Writing that recognizes the position of your reader. Writing that is professional, respectful, so that in turn, you will earn the respect of your reader. This course covers 3 broad topics, which I will go on to describe for you. Firstly, we'll be exploring teacher beliefs and attitudes about inclusion and disabilities. How many of you have actually worked with persons with disabilities before? It's likely not many of you have had significant interactions. So we'll be exploring your attitudes, doing some fairly in-depth self-analysis about your thoughts, feelings, etc. in this regard. In Alberta, inclusive education is considered a way of thinking differently and acting differently. It's not doing the same thing as usual and then at the last minute making some small adjustments as a token gesture towards accommodating a learner. This requires a shift in mindset and attitude. Teaching from an inclusive education mindset is a challenge because we teachers want to keep it simple by teaching from one book, one curriculum guide, one instructional approach. But we know one size does not fit all. Admittedly, it's tough to meet the diverse learning needs of the different students in the classroom. As a teacher, it falls to you to make educational decisions that are based on the best interests of each and every student, not on your needs. I have seen it. Teachers are tired. They're stressed. They're struggling to meet the learning needs of students with disabilities alongside other non-disabled students in the classroom. This course will help you develop skills and approaches to meet the needs of everyone. This course will help you to begin to develop understandings of learners with disabilities and begin to explore strategies related to establishing, promoting, and sustaining inclusive learning environments, where diversity is embraced and openly welcomed. An inclusive environment means every student feels welcome, safe, and cared for. The main questions addressed by this course are: how can we create a learning environment that engages students and helps them learn? How can we create a learning environment that allows all students to achieve their full potential to the best of their abilities? How does the learner-teacher relationship impact learning and student success? What does competence look like, sound like, what it sounds like may not be a factor for a deaf person. But we would want to look at language competencies. How can we help our students build growth mindsets? Develop positive attitudes towards learning. What does that even mean, growth mindsets? In fact, there is a substantial body of research in this area that can be applied to inclusive education. After we cover inclusive education as a broader topic, then we're going on to the second topic, which we'll be discussing universal design for learning or differentiating instruction. What is universal design for learning and how does it support differentiating instruction for students with diverse needs? We'll explore what differentiating instruction actually means, what it looks like practically to accommodate the learning needs of each student. We'll explore the benefits of differentiating instruction by understanding the key elements of UDL. The third broad topic we'll be looking at is scaffolding and peer supports. We'll be exploring this in terms of what is meant by scaffolding and what it actually entails. We will also be discussing how we can leverage technology as an instructional support. Now let's go into the course components in more detail. The bulk of the course will be asynchronous, which allows you to schedule your time in what way best meets your needs. We are cognizant that you have competing demands on your time, whether you're juggling work, school, family, etc. So this course is designed to enable you to access course material whenever it is convenient for you. Information about assignments, quizzes, final exams is available on the course website and easily accessible to you. Much of the learning will be independent study. Through eClass, you'll have access to the Zoom meeting links, course outline, course schedule, and information about how you will be evaluated. The required text can be accessed through the publisher's website and is titled Other Ways of Seeing Inclusive Education. Review the material on eClass for the weekly schedule of topics and activities. There are different evaluation components to determine your understanding of the course content. There are 3 assignments, each of which is fully described in eClass, including submission deadline, date, and time. Late assignments will not be accepted. There will be 3 quizzes. Questions for the quizzes will be taken from the required reading. Quizzes will be completed in eClass, and you will have 2 attempts to complete each quiz. So if something goes wrong, you do get a second chance. The final exam will be all-inclusive of the material covered throughout the entire semester. The final exam is not limited to the content since the previous quiz. To reiterate, The final exam will include all of the course content covered throughout the term. That's why I chose this graphic for my slide. It's the ring of fire. The final exam will be written through eClass and is open book and open notes. You are free to refer to whatever you wish. However, there is a time limit to completing the exam, so it behooves you to be well prepared before you begin and not waste time looking for answers in your material. You will need to understand the course content in order to respond to the exam questions effectively and efficiently. Don't expect to do well by relying on searching your text and notes for answers in real time during the exam. Now, what can you expect from this course? As I mentioned before, most of the course content is presented asynchronously. Pre-recorded lectures will first be presented during class time on Tuesdays. So you have a choice. You can go into eClass and view the lecture on your own time, or you can attend the lecture during our scheduled class time on Tuesdays. And during breaks between the recorded lectures, you can engage in discussions about the content covered. This allows you the chance to engage with your peers synchronously. Thursday class times will run as seminars, allowing you the opportunity to create your own understandings of the content covered on the previous Tuesday. The seminars allow you to reflect on your learning and to ask questions. I will be present there personally on Thursdays. Consider it tutorial time, where we can discuss anything related to the course. Occasionally, guest speakers will be presenting on Thursdays. So keep that in mind. Thursdays will be seminars or guest lectures. Now, what do we expect from you? We expect you to complete the assigned tasks and readings. It's important that you do all the reading assigned and to keep up with the reading schedule. Be warned, this course requires a lot of reading. We expect you to complete the quizzes and the final exam. We expect and hope you will ask questions. Don't be timid to ask questions. Please ask away. Now I am happy to respond to any questions you may have. Thank you for attending the lecture. A big hello and Happy New Year, everyone.
We can't hear Tracy's voice, but I'll just interpret really quickly. So someone in the chat had mentioned that there was swearing. I just want to be very clear that I don't ever swear. So it wasn't coming from my mic.
And can you hear Tracy now?
Yes.
Okay, so do we have any questions about what was just presented? I can maybe have a look at the chat.
Joanne? There are questions about the quizzes. So last time they were timed, but I am not sure that if the quizzes are still timed. And they usually have 2 opportunities to take the quiz. So I'm wondering if it's going to be the same this term.
It's the same. Yeah, it is the same.
Okay, so in that case, You have 2 opportunities to take the quiz, and you have 25 minutes to answer the quiz. So it is time.
Great. Everything seemed clear so far?
Looks like there's lots of questions in the chat. So this is Sarah speaking. It looks like there's lots of questions in the chat, but I can go through some of them. So I guess the first question, is the quiz open book? So can we use our books and our materials at the same time to do the quiz?
That I'm not sure about myself. Sandra, are you able to answer? Is the quiz open book?
No, the quizzes are not open book. That's why they have 2 opportunities to take them.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, let's move on to the second pre-recorded presentation. The first one was just about the course and some of the mechanics of how we'll go forward from now on. But this one is more course content.
I just have a quick question about Thursday's lecture.
Okay, go
I
ahead.
just want to know if it's best to be attended on person or like in real time for the Thursdays, since there's sometimes speakers you mentioned and the professor is going to be present to answer as well questions. So I'm guessing it's recommended to be there on the time on Thursdays. I just want that clarification to schedule myself.
It's a good question. Most of those guests will be pre-recorded as well. So again, you can either watch them independently or watch them during the Thursday class time. It's kind of a decision that you make for your own time. I will be here Thursday, so if you do have questions, you can address them to me and we can have any discussions on any topics that you want to cover. Okay.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you very much.
And I'm going to answer another question in the chat, Dr. Weber. So it's about the quiz. The quizzes are not during class time. You have a due date to answer the quiz. So as long as you do it before that due date, either your first attempt or your second attempt, you will be fine, but it's not during class time.
So that gives you lots of time to prepare for whatever the content is for a specific quiz. So you don't have to be prepared for taking it in class time. Do it on your own time. As long as it's before the deadline, right? Okay, I'm going to share my screen again for the second presentation.
I'm going to talk about inclusive education and begin to develop your abilities to evaluate environments that are intended to be inclusive. We'll discuss whether they are or not. We'll consider 4 key questions. These questions will guide your assessment of whether what you see in the learning environment is inclusive education. These 4 questions will lead to the understanding of the big question, is this inclusion? The first question: how can we create a learning environment that engages students and helps them to learn and achieve to the best of their abilities? The second question: what role does meaningful relationships play in student success? The third question: what does presumed competence look and sound like? This is from the teacher's perspective. What do they look and sound like from the teacher's perspective? The final question: how can we help our students to build growth mindsets? What does a growth mindset look like? What does a growth mindset even mean? So let's explore in more detail the first question, which deals with the learning environment. All of us have the ability to learn independent of schooling. That's a given. We can learn independently through reading, by engaging in activities like fixing a car, or engaging with others and gaining incidental learning. We learn from platforms like YouTube, even people watching. Learning can come about in any number of different ways. When we consider the learning environment, that's when we think of schools. We think of interventions. Which interventions will work? By the way, I'll use 3 different ASL signs: disrupt, grab opportunity, help, to refer to the English word intervention, depending on context. So the most successful interventions are encouraging positive behavior toward building positive relationships. When I was growing up, this was not considered important. When I was in school, student outcomes, marks, and such were important, not student-teacher relationships. Today, we value relationships with our students. We recognize the importance of these relationships. We have discovered that learning does not happen without positive relationships with the teacher. But decades ago, that was not considered important at all. A little hard to believe. But back then, the emphasis was on the mechanics of teaching and learning. Reading, writing, homework, worksheets, essays, assignments. Back then, teachers often had more of a relationship with the student's parents. If a student got into trouble, it would be the teacher reporting to the parents, and together they would determine consequences. Today, that dynamic is very different. Today's teacher navigates creating positive relationships with many different people. Even a single significant relationship with an adult at school can have a tremendously positive effect on a student. If a student has no one, not one positive relationship with an adult at school, they will struggle to learn. Their relationships with teachers can significantly change the way a student feels about school. Our goal in school is not to make children do anything. We know you can't really force anyone to do anything. Tough life lesson to learn. Our goal is to make them want to do something, want to do anything, to create a positive environment and atmosphere such that the student is eager to take on a challenge. Building positive relationships does take a lot of hard work. The hard work is in self-discovery, self-analysis, looking at your own attitudes, knowing ourselves well. Right now, think of a student you know or have worked with who has been a challenge. For my part, I have lots of painful memories. I have many memories of where I purposefully made the student feel bad. Throughout the course, I will share some of my stories in hopes you can learn from my mistakes. I'll start with this story about my first major failure as a teacher. It relates to our building relationships theme. I was a first-year teacher and I was meeting a student for the very first time. The student was deaf and technically blind. The student had Usher syndrome. Vision begins to deteriorate in adolescence. The field of vision narrows over time until full blindness at some point later in adulthood. For this class, I wanted to begin establishing a relationship with the students through dialogue journals. We would do our regular classroom lessons, but my goal was to reinforce their reading and writing skills through the dialogue journals. The routine was for me to write something in each of the journals and hand them back, and then each of them would respond and then hand back the journal to me. I started by asking the students simple questions such as, how old are you? What are your parents' names? Where were you born? What makes you feel happy? So I asked a lot of questions. From the one student, I never got a response. So I tried some other questions I thought might engage the student. For example, what do you like about school? Among a number of other questions. I was still not getting any response in the dialogue journal. So I pulled him aside and asked why he wasn't responding to me in the dialogue journal. He didn't say anything. So the next day I tried some other questions I thought might engage him. This time he did respond. His response was scribbling over my questions, effectively making them illegible. I took this as defiance and I got angry. I pulled him aside again and asked him what he thought I felt when he scribbled over my questions to completely blacken them out. No response. I told him he needed to respond to my questions. So I said we would start over again. I wanted to keep it relatively easy by just asking him one question. What is your name? He wrote down his name. Then I asked a new question, which he scribbled out again. I was so frustrated. I called him over again. I asked him what he was feeling as he scribbled over my questions, at which point he grabbed my pen and scribbled out his name from the previous day. Then he started to cry. I felt so bad and I apologized, admitting I shouldn't have done that, but I could see the relationship between us was damaged. This is a particularly painful memory for me. It weighed on me for many years. It wasn't till much later I realized what I had done wrong. I had all the power. I asked all the questions. I gave no information to him about me. I didn't share with him my own experiences. I could have said that I was born in Saskatchewan too. I could have shared that I have pet cats, at which point I could have asked if he had pets, and to begin building a relationship through sharing. Instead, I held the power and was carrying out what must have felt like an inquisition. I was expecting him to respond to me. I was expecting him to provide me information about him, but I wasn't sharing anything about myself. That was a valuable lesson for me. It can happen in big schools and in large classrooms that a student could go an entire day without anyone saying their name. I don't know if that's your experience, but when I look back at my school days, I don't recall the teacher saying my name often. Be the adult who speaks to each student by name. Everyone loves to hear their name in a positive context. It makes them feel important. Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, no matter what happens. As a teacher, I had a number of students that I would think, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with you? I would usher them along, but privately I would be thinking there is not much hope. And then they surprise you and they start to catch on and get better. You need to understand the power of connection. You need to insist they do their best work to become the best they can possibly be. Moving on to our next question regarding competencies and skills. Let's begin by talking about comments often shared among teachers, especially in the staff room, and what these comments have in common. My students are so far behind, I don't think they will ever catch up. Shouldn't we be more realistic about this kid? They're never going to get it. High school work is too hard for him. He refuses to do the work I do give him. But he has a medical diagnosis. I'm not sure that he can do the work. She is just no good at math. Her parents confirmed this with me. He can't do this because he can't read the textbook. If a student has a severe disability, how can I presume he can learn what the other kids are learning? What all of these comments have in common is that they reflect the deficit perspective. And we all have it. We all have been socialized into believing what people are capable of doing. And that influences our teaching and our attitudes. The deficit perspective is fueled by medical models of disability. Diagnoses dominate our thinking of what's wrong with us. We are constantly looking to identify the problem with the body, the mind, the hearing, the the vision, the learning. Every problem has to be identified and labeled. And then we have to fix the problem because we want the person to become as normal as possible. This is what we call the normalcy discourses. And these discourses are embedded in our living, breathing, and thinking on a daily basis. This is the deficit perspective. So, our 4 questions touch on the learning environment, relationships, presumed competence, and growth mindset. I will explore the growth mindset in a separate lecture. At this point, I wish to emphasize that inclusion is an experience, not a placement. Inclusion is experienced through belonging. The belonging continuum does initially emphasize placement. Inclusion can be looked at as a continuum, which comprises 5 kinds of spaces. First is exclusion, where there is no sense of belonging. In fact, one is excluded. The second is segregation, where there is belonging as part of a subgroup, but excluded from the main larger group. Integration means there is some interaction with the larger group, but there is no real sense of belonging. Inclusion acknowledges the presence of the other. They are included, but don't yet feel they belong. The final space of belonging is a mutual and shared sense of belonging by everyone. Let's look more closely at exclusion. I'll use my own personal experience as an example. I was born profoundly deaf. At that time, all deaf children in the province were sent to the Saskatchewan School for the Deaf, which meant the child would not be attending their neighborhood K-12 school. My parents, who were both educators, did not want that for me. They wanted to keep me at home. They didn't want me excluded from my local school. So my education was exclusively oral. Tremendous energy and time was focused on teaching me to speak. My parents did not want me to be in a segregated setting with other deaf or hard of hearing peers. They didn't want me placed outside the regular classroom. They felt such a placement was not acceptable. As a result, I was placed in a regular classroom, the so-called integrated classroom. I had zero support, not even a resource room teacher. I was not provided an FM system. No tutoring services were provided, let alone a sign language interpreter. Did I feel like I belonged? Not even a little bit. I felt tremendous pressure to work hard, and I had to do it all by myself. No one would help me. I knew I was completely on my own. I had zero relationship with my teacher. But back in those days, those relationships were not considered important whatsoever. The burden was strictly on my shoulders to read everything, to be self-taught, because I could not hear a single thing that the teacher or my peers were saying. But the educators called it integration. That was my experience. Perhaps for a student in a similar situation, but in a larger division, they may have had access to a resource teacher or been provided technology or interpreting services. That experience might more correctly be described as integration. In my own experience, I did not ever feel included. Take chemistry labs. The teacher would be at the front of the lab leading a demonstration, and the whole class would be gathered around the bench to watch. Impossible for me to follow her instructions. I would stand at the back of the crowd, not even trying to follow along, knowing that evening would be spent studying to understand what that experiment was all about. Was my experience inclusive? Not even close. I had to pretend I wasn't deaf. I sat 5 hours in the classroom, not hearing a single word, bored to tears. Every single day for years. And every night was reading, rereading, studying, and doing my own additional research in order to keep on top of the content. As a result, I developed an extreme work ethic. There was no other way to survive in school. Every night, I would do schoolwork for an additional 3 hours and 5 to 6 hours on weekends. This went on for years. That was my whole life, working all alone. I came to that lesson very young. At the age of 7, I knew no one was going to help me. As I mentioned, my parents were both educators. For them, the definition of inclusion meant being placed in a regular classroom, in a regular program, with regular hearing classmates. They thought that would make me normal. There was nothing normal about that experience. It's not normal to be left out, to not belong. Now we'll move on to the last space on the continuum. Inclusion, where everyone experiences belonging. The image here on the slide represents everyone as icons of different shapes and sizes, representing the diversity of learners. And it's important that teachers accept and embrace this diversity. Everyone is different, and that needs to be accepted and respected. This is inclusion. Since my days in K-12, the definition of inclusion has evolved. Now there are more supports available, such as resource teachers, technology like FM systems, interpreting services, tutoring, note-taking. Today, there are many more resources available to support learners. This is more in line with today's definition of inclusion. But even if we provide all the supports possible, and yet the student still feels stupid, does not feel a sense of belonging in the class, or does not feel connected to the teacher, then it's not an inclusive environment. Belonging is key. We need a broader perspective on where we should target our efforts. Instead of emphasizing resources, let's focus on resources and belonging.
Just double checking.
Hi, this is Judy.
Okay, great. I think we've got everybody's video back where we need it. So we have basically 2 minutes before the class officially closes. So I just want to make sure we cover off any questions that might be there. Let's see what's in the comment section and see if there's anything we need to address. By now, you're probably a little overwhelmed with some of the content presented. So Sandra or Anna, I guess, do you feel everything in the chat was answered?
Yes. Oh, there's
Okay,
a
good.
question coming in the chat. Just 1 second. They're asking questions about the quizzes, how many questions there are.
Okay, I will go into eClass and post all that information. It will be ready for you next week.
And I guess there was another question. Okay, go ahead. Oh, see, a question directed to me in a private message. So that's fine. I will answer directly. So through eClass and the textbook, you will have access to all of the modules. And so you will be able to get access to everything you need in the textbook modules. Okay.
There was a question early today, early in the chat. Are you sharing the slides or just posting the recording for the lecture?
I'm not sharing the slides separately. No, it's all part of the recording. Okay. I'm not sure that they would be that beneficial. Oh. Okay, so now I guess we are ready to end things. Okay. I'll see you on Tuesday. Okay, thanks.